bond issue that we structured here, just to look at the maximum limited tax proceeds you could get. The final maturity, length of maturity under Illinois law is 20 years. So we wanted to give you your outside amount if you went out 20 years at today's rates. So we have the bond issue separated into three types. The Series 2010A is the working cash fund bonds, 10 million, for cash flow purposes. So that's the amount that stays in the working cash fund. Then we've got the 2010B bonds, and that's a general obligation refunding bond. The reason we need to refund that bond is to make room for interest on the other bonds when we're maximizing. If we don't go out 20 years and we reduce the amount we're borrowing, that refunding portion will go down proportionally. So, and the reason we're looking at refunding bonds, there's one other option called zero coupon bonds, capital appreciation bonds. Those are extremely expensive types of debt that defer interest until the time of maturity. It's compounded interest. So that option ended up being much more expensive than the refunding option. Then the Series 2010C bonds is also a working cash bond, but it's working cash for capital purposes. It's restricted for capital, must be used for that purpose and spent over the next 3 years or so. And we've got 15.9 million of those bonds, and those are issued as the Build America bonds. So those have that 35% rebate. Just to talk a little bit more about the Build America bonds on page 16, we've got a chart that shows you the interest rate, the TE scale, is tax exempt. So those go from 3.6 to 4.5%. And then we have the taxable scale that a district rated in the AA category, such as yourself, would have on the taxable Build America bonds, 4.99 to 5.93%. Those are taxable bonds. That's why the rates are higher. However, when we take into consideration the 35% that the federal government is rebating us, the net scale for those bonds is 324 to 385. Okay, so we look at this all the time. The further out we go, the bigger the benefit for the Build America bonds are right now. And just so you know, the Build America bond authority that takes 35% of the interest to the district expires December 31st of 2010. There's talk of extending it, and I'm somewhat confident it will be extended because it's been a very popular program, but it will be at a lower reimbursement rate of 28% is what they're talking about right now. Page 17 looks at issuing the maximum limited tax bond proceeds. You could get about just under 26 million at today's interest rates. And that includes the 10 million for working cash and to stay in the working cash fund, and 15.9 million for capital, which goes from the working cash fund through a series of transfers. It's working cash, education, O&M, capital construction. I'll talk about that flow of funds in a minute, but it gets to the capital fund and is spent on capital projects. Now, let me just talk a little bit about the way we structured these bonds. What we did is take the highest cost bond and try to pay them off first, and that would be the 10 million, because the 10 million for operations has to be taxable, and you want them to be taxable. You don't want to be able to show a need for that 10 million bonds, because that would mean in the next 13 months you were negative 10 million. That's what the IRS requires to issue those on a tax-exempt basis. So those bonds are the highest cost, 5.51% is what we're assuming here, and we pay those off first. The next, the lower cost bonds are the regular tax-exempt bonds, and those are for refunding, and that's the Series 2010B bonds, and those are at 4.3%, so we pay those off next. And then the lowest cost bond, even though the longest in maturity, is the 15.9 million Build America bonds, because of that 35% rebate, you're borrowing long and weighted 20-year debt at 3.89%, which is pretty amazing in terms of low interest rates. The next column is the 35% subsidy. So what you get that 35% only on the 15.9 million, but as you can see, that adds up to 6.3 million over the life of the bond, benefit from the federal government. And this uses up the debt base pretty much for the 20 years. You see the tax stays the same, goes down. Page 18 is just a picture of this. So to get the 26 million, you fill in around your existing bonds with these greenish bars going out 20 years. Go to the next page, just to reiterate, go out 20 years at any one time. So the next time that debt base would be available to you would be down the road once you pay off some of your bonds. So in 5 years, you have 5 more years at the end of the schedule, and so on and so forth. And it keeps growing in the CPI. It's important to know, right now, the majority of the district space is used to levy your 2019, and that's why we need to refund the 2001 bonds to make room for interest payments on the new bonds. I think I talked about all of this. Just the last bullet point. I think the advantage to all these options are, number one, you're locking in incredibly low interest rates. You're getting money that you need to help you weather the cash flow challenges ahead. And you can also, on the construction side, lock in low-cost construction in this bidding environment. The negative of all these options is it does use up your debt base for 20 years. So you have to balance need now versus needs down the road, and how you would fund those future needs. There's referendum. Page 20 looks at, just for an example of what proceeds you could get if the CPI, instead of 1.5%, is 2.5%, which again is more like our historical average. And in this case, you could get up to $32.4 million. So you can see how that CPI compounding gives you a lot more proceeds over that 20-year period. So in this case, if you were able to do that much, the federal subsidy would be over $8.8 million over that 20-year period. So again, the debt is structured in the same way, just with a higher CPI. So we really can make that assumption whatever we want, whether it's 2.5 or 1.5. We just think it's better to be a little more conservative. Because again, if you're wrong, you're coming out of pocket and your operating funds to pay some of that debt. Page 21 is a picture of that. Now, option 1A on page 22, this is just some food for thought. Under the Build America Bond regs, you do not have to pledge that 35% subsidy to the repayment of your bonds. You could, in fact, take that money and put it in your operating funds. So it would supplement your operating funds for the 20-year period. So, I'm sorry, I'm jumping to page 23. Page 23 shows this option. So we've got the $10 million working cash, which is the same. We have the refunding, where we're actually having to refund more bonds here because we are issuing taxable debt without the subsidy. Because it's taxable debt without the subsidy, we can, instead of $15.9 million, we get $12.1 million for capital under this option. But the 35% subsidy, that $5 million over the 20 years, each year you would put that $263,000 into the operating fund, whether it's education, O&M, unrestricted. So you get less proceeds, again, because we're just going with taxable rates on the Build America bond. It's higher, 5.98%. And we're not pledging that subsidy to the debt. We're going to use it for operations. Some issuers think this is great, some don't. Just go to page 25. Just review kind of what I just said with regard to the bad subsidy. If you want to put it in your operating fund, you can, but then your debt base bears the burden of the taxable debt for that Build America bond. Page 26 and 27 look at